What's up guys, Alexander here with Date Psych. I want to share a new study with you guys today. First I want to apologize, it's very hot here, I'm already sweaty, so you're going to have to deal with the sweaty shirt, unfortunately. And I want to shout out guys to Thinking Ape, Cognitive Primate. A lot of you guys probably just came here from his channel. He endorsed me on his channel and I don't want to let you guys down, I don't want to disappoint you. So I hope that all of you who came over here, who were recommended to come here, I hope you enjoy the content. I hope you guys learn a lot of things. I'm going to do a lot of study reviews here. You may not agree with the findings. Some of the findings may contradict past findings, and that's just the way it is. But agree, disagree, however your take is. I hope you guys find some value in the content anyway. And welcome everybody, and I'm really glad that you came. And a big thanks to our friend, the Cognitive Primate, for recommending the channel. It's kind of surreal to see that, and it makes me feel really good. It makes me really happy. So anyway, let me tell you about the study that I want to share with you guys today. This is a new study, and I'm trying to pick studies that stand out to me as being well designed. And this is a study on mate selection, on mate value, on desirability. Something I have mentioned in past videos, I'll go over this again here, is that a lot of the research that we have on attractiveness, if it's research on mate selection, if it's research on physical attractiveness, it comes down to stated partner preferences. It's basically survey research, where they ask someone, maybe they'll show a photo picture like, how attractive is this man, 1 through 5 or something like that. So these designs have a lot of limitations in that they don't measure actual mate choice in the real world. This is a study that does measure mate choice in the real world, and it does it in a way that has a lot of what is called ecological validity. It applies very closely to real world outcomes for the individuals. A limitation of this study, although perhaps not as big a limitation as it may seem, and we'll cover that in a little bit, is that this is a study of an indigenous population in Africa called the Himba. These are pastoral people, a semi-nomadic people. And this is a population that is often studied in evolutionary psychology and in anthropology because it gives a really good idea of what early human behavior may have been like, of what hunter-gatherer behavior, because this is also conjoined with a hunter-gatherer group. They're kind of partially pastoralists, partially hunter-gatherers. So it gives a good idea of what the early human environment might have looked like, and thus how applicable evolutionary psychological theories are to mate selection from that point of view, insofar as are these things biological or not, are they genetic or not, and so on. So anyway, this is kind of a unique population that the study is derived from, but as we'll see from the results, it actually parallels Western populations, at least as far as the findings go, pretty well. Let me explain the methodology and the study design for you. So this is a medium to large size sample in psychology. It's looking at about 300 individuals within the community, but the measures are actually much wider. This is taking large samples from the community beyond that and having them rate other individuals within the community. So we get primarily large amount of ratings, many more than the 300 in count of the study, for individuals in the community that these people may have selected as mates. And we're seeing a very large number of ratings of individuals from the community as insofar as how desirable the individuals included in the study are. So we see, for example, very strong validity in that we're talking about people within the population actually rating the mate value or the mate desirability of people that they know and people that they potentially could or choose or reject as romantic partners or mates. So to sum up real quick, they're taking a large sample of Himba pastoralists, they're going around and they're asking them, rate all of these people in your community, rate people that you have had sex with, rate people that you have passed up, tell us how desirable they are as mates. And so we get ratings as well from dyads, which are pairs. We have about 9,000 dyads, or essentially people that have hooked up with other people, people who have been married to other people, because this is a very open, non-monogamous culture as well, guys. That's something that should be understood. This is a culture that is not especially rigid, and so people have a lot of liberty to freely choose the mates that they want to be with. It is a monogamous, or I should say it is a semi-monogamous, semi-polygamous kind of arrangement. The men and the women are both typically free, perhaps more so or perhaps equivalent to the kind of freedom that we see in a Western population insofar as people choose the mates that they want to be with. Most second marriages are marriages of love. People choose their relationships, basically. So there are two main theoretical constructs that are being tested, two hypotheses that are being tested. They're kind of portrayed as competing hypotheses, although they do not necessarily conflict. And these are called the biological market model and the aspirational mate choice model. The biological market model hypothesizes that people adapt to the market, so to speak, the mate market that they're in, to the environment that they're in. And the environment will determine the kind of mate choices and the decisions that they make. So in this model, for example, people who are more desirable tend to be more selective in the mates that they choose because they have more power, and so they're more selective in the biological market model. This is something that's influenced by things like, for example, sex ratio. If there are many more women than men, men will have an advantage. If it's the other way around, women would have an advantage under this model. We see this supported in some past research. For example, people who rate themselves more highly as more desirable mates, as well as people who are rated as more desirable mates in past research, tend to be more selective in the people that they pick. Maybe intuitive here. More attractive people are going to be more picky, and they're going to pair up with more attractive people. So this is also a model that you might kind of guess from that is kind of consistent with what we see as far as assortative mating. People picking people often who are kind of similar to their own level. People that have more options, being more selective. The second model is the aspirational partner model. And this is supported in research on mate preference mostly. If people say what kind of mate they want. And the idea is that the mate choice is aspirational. People pick the highest value mates that they can. You've heard of hypergamy, for example. This is usually talked about in the manosphere, something that applies to women, but you could say that there's hypergamous behavior anytime a partner selects for any trait that is better than what they are, essentially. And most often we see this not in respect to physical attractiveness as far as the research is concerned. I know that maybe not what some people have heard, but that's typically what the research shows. Where we really see hypergamy, for example, is the tendency to select up and across income, up and across status, education level. When we see selection for looks and attractiveness, it tends to be more assortative. People end up with partners who are very similar to their own, even if they express, for example, in this model, an aspirational desire to be with the supermodel, to be with the Giga Chad, or whatever it may be. People may aspire to that. As far as if those are actual mate outcomes, the people they end up with, not so much. But that's what we're looking at here with the aspirational model, the idea that people go after the best mate. You might wonder, hearing the aspirational model, why in the hell would anyone not go after the best mate? There's a lot of reasons why people don't shoot way out of their league. Perhaps fear of rejection, because it's a riskier strategy. And so not just something like fear of rejection. It might be a riskier strategy from an evolutionary point of view as well. This might explain why people do tend to show, as I said, there's actually conflicting research on this aspirational hypothesis. Sometimes people do show an actual preference for people. And why might that be? Why don't people always just go for the Stacy, the Giga Chad, the model, etc.? These are people that have more options. They might leave you. They might abandon you. You might not get a chance to reproduce. The relationship might not last as long, meaning that the children produced in that relationship, and these are things that the results of this study and others actually show, the relationship might not last as long. Thus, there might not be resources to ensure the survival of any children produced in that relationship, and so on. So there are actually good reasons why we might have evolved a preference to be cautious about people who are very out of our league. Another example of this would be potential higher risk of infidelity. And we generally don't see a strong association with attractiveness level and infidelity, but we do see that people who are more attractive are more prone to being approached when in a relationship. It's called mate poaching. You're with a partner, a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and other people are trying to steal you away, trying to steal your attractive girlfriend away, your attractive boyfriend away, whatever it may be. It's called mate poaching, and this may be more of a risk. In groups like the Himba, where there's a very, very high rate of extra pair parenting, because I've mentioned in past videos and in some articles, most of the basically all of the genetic research shows that global populations, European populations, have a very, very low rate of extra pair parenting. It's something like 1 to 3%. The vast majority of children are produced by the father who thinks he is the father, basically. In the Himba, this is kind of a standout exception of all the populations in the world. Extra-pair parenting in this population is about 50%, guys. About 50% of the children are raised by fathers who are not the biological father. Because this is a population that is very open sexually in that sense. It's polygamous, for one, and both male and female liaisons outside of the relationship are kind of accepted. They're also nomadic, so groups mix. You may be with one group of 1,000 people one moment, then half of that group may break off and another half may come in. So people don't even necessarily keep close track of all of the family member in their immediate location. So there's a lot of circumstances that have contributed to that and made the Himba very unique. But kind of a digression there. The point is that mate poaching may be a higher risk for more attractive partners. So people may have evolved a little bit of caution to going with more attractive partners in order to protect the lineage, the parentage, essentially their genetic offspring in that kind of a way. So there you have it. These are two hypotheses within evolutionary psychology. Some of these, they tend, like I said, these tend to be thought of as competing hypotheses. And in some sense they are, but it's also valid in psychology, in evolutionary psychology, that you can have two things that seem contradictory. It's not the Bible, guys. It's not a religious dogma. It doesn't have to be right all of the time. One hypothesis can apply to certain kinds of behavior under certain circumstances. The other could apply to others. And that's what this kind of experimentation, this kind of observation in research is designed to let us learn and test. Okay, guys, pretty long introduction there going over the methodology, but it's important. You have to understand those things to understand the results. We're going to get into the results. They tested a few different things, looked at a few different correlations to test these hypotheses to see which were consistent and which perhaps were not, which of these two competing hypotheses. One of the first things that they looked up is what's called the hierarchy of desirability. Basically, how steep is the curve of desirability? Is desirability kind of flat, which you would see in a more flat distribution and a more even distribution, a more normally distributed bell curve? Basically, people are rated as desirable at more or less the same rate, or is there just a sliver of men or women who are way more desirable? And what we see in this research is that the hierarchy of desirability is much higher for men. Okay, there's more of a skew for men, meaning that there's a smaller percentage of men very, very attractive. There's also a smaller number of men who are considered very attractive. If you look at the graph that I have put up here, you can see that attractiveness ratings for men bunch way up at the low end. This is a Likert scale of just 4, so it's asking attractiveness or mate value or desirability 1 through 4. Desirable? No. Simple. Look on the graph where everyone bunches up, guys. All of the men are at the very, very end. In fact, even the women aren't rated especially highly in this. There's almost no one who gets like a really high rating, like, oh yeah, that's a really, really desirable partner. Some of you may recognize this distribution. It may seem very familiar to you because this is a very similar distribution to what was found in the very large OkCupid data set by Christian Rudder that was published in the book Dataclysm. I'll put that up as well, and you can see basically the same thing. Men were rated by women as less attractive than men rated women. Men were all bunched up and women were spread out a little bit more. There was a higher hierarchy of desirability for men than there was for women. So I mentioned at the beginning, right, we're looking at an African population. We're not looking at a Western population. How generalizable is this? Well, here we actually see something that overlaps really, really well with a Western population. And that's the kind of cross-cultural research that confirms evolutionary psychology hypotheses fairly well, because we're seeing a trend as far as how men and women are perceived by the opposite sex that is reflected now across cultures, and even very, very diverse cultures, and in a culture that we think probably resembles pretty closely the way people lived in early civilization, in early human history. And so I mentioned the two models we're looking at, the biological market model, the aspirational model. A high hierarchy of desirability for one or for both genders, well actually I should say just for one gender, because we expect it for just one gender due to a sex ratio. It would support the biological market hypothesis, that the environmental conditions essentially attribute more desirability to one sex over the other. So moving on to the next point here, and this is the question: how does desirability predict mate selection? The biological market hypothesis says that more desirable individuals will be more picky. And since we have ratings of these individuals from their partners, we have ratings of these individuals from the entire community, we can kind of test that here. We can see if that prediction actually comes out to be true. And simply what we see is, yes, that the more desirable the individual, the more choosy they were. We can also see this in the ratings given by the individuals in this case. If you look at the graph here, you'll see this actually only came out for men. And remember, this is a population where men are in the minority. So this is also consistent with the biological market hypothesis. Basically, that men give fewer high ratings. Men are more attractive, and so men are giving, or I should say, excuse me, not men overall are more attractive. You can see that's not the case from the first image. Rather, that the most desirable men are giving fewer high ratings because they have a much wider range of mate choice. On the flip side, you can look on the left side of the graph, which is for women, and you can see that the relationships are pretty flat. Women are giving similar ratings regardless of their own rating. For the next test of these two hypotheses, we want to see if there's a discrepancy between how people rate themselves and their matches, or I should say, how people are rated by the community and how their matches are rated by the community. Basically, do we see people that actually have the same level of mate value mating? Are they actually picking people of similar value as partners? That would be the fundamental test or observation that would confirm the biological market hypothesis. On the flip side, if people are selecting partners who are very varied in attractiveness, that's something else. And I should mention, first right now, we're going to look at ratings of attractiveness. On paper, who people say is the most desirable partner, not who they're actually ending up with. But we will also look at who they're actually ending up with. And what we see as far as who people say is the most desirable partner does not match up with the ratings of individuals. People pick the most desirable partners on paper. So here we have confirmation for the aspirational mate choice hypothesis. People, if they could, they would select mates that are more attractive, that are more desirable mates. If you look at the graphs here, the first two top are examples of how the distribution would look given one hypothesis or the other, given the aspirational hypothesis or the biological market hypothesis. And the third one is how it actually came out. And you can see that it matches up with the aspirational hypothesis. Moving on to the next point, we're going to look at relationship outcomes. Basically what we're seeing is, do relationships have a better outcome, which is measured in this case by how long they stay together, if the mates are more similar in mate value or dissimilar in mate value. And we're looking at measures of mate quality as well. How much contact they had with their partners. And we're talking about physical contact as well as non-physical contact, communication, telephone calls. And we'll also look at, because remember, this is a community where people keep other partners on the side, both men and women. We're looking at how many partners people thought their partner had. And what we see here is that the further people are in mate value from one another, the more disparity there is between the mate value of a man and a woman, the less contact they're having with each other, which would indicate perhaps one of them doesn't desire the other quite as much. As far as perceptions of having the side partner, the side chick, the informal partner, if your partner is more attractive in this study, you would have been more likely to say, yeah, they have other hookups, for sure. If the partner is less attractive, they would have said, no, I don't think so. So people perceive their partners as being essentially more promiscuous the more attractive they are. However, the results show that that wasn't actually the case when the partners themselves reported how many partners they had. And so a quick digression here, we can talk about social desirability bias. Are people underreporting the partners that they had in this case? Probably not, because it's not a stigma in this culture. I think this is probably an example where the self-report, people saying, no, I'm not having that much sex, it's probably true, especially since it's consistent for men and for women as well. And this is actually consistent with a lot of other research, some that I have covered before, that basically shows people probably aren't as promiscuous as they're perceived to be. We regularly overestimate the promiscuity of other individuals, but when we ask people to report their own promiscuity, most people report less than what other people think, except for a few high reporters in the top 10%. And we can move on now to who was actually having sex. So of course they asked all of these people to report their sexual partners in the community. This came out to something like 9,000 dyads. So a lot of pairs of people that reported having sex with each other, basically. And what they found was that the further away two individuals were in mate desirability, the less likely they were to have had sex with one another. The less likely they were to be married as well, or to be in a relationship. So both formal or married partners as well as informal partners. A very strong correlation between female and male mate value. The lowest male and female mates were more likely to have hooked up, to be permanent partners or informal partners, the highest as well. You can see this on the graph, a very clear linear correlation between the two, positive going up. And if you look at the side as well, that's an example of what it would look like in gray if it were a model with random dyads. You can see no correlation. It could be in any direction, but basically flat. Now, this pairing up with other people who have a similar level of attractiveness would be supported by, or I should say, would support the market logical mate hypothesis. So this is also very consistent with basically all of the past research on assortative mating. When we see who people are actually having sex with, when we see who people are actually getting into relationships with, who they're actually marrying, people more often than not are pretty similar in attractiveness. But when we ask people who they want on paper, they shoot for the stars. And a final result here, I'll put the graph up on the table, but a desirability gap predicted shorter relationships. Basically, the further two people were away in mate value, one person high mate value, the other person low mate value, the shorter their relationship would last. The relationships that lasted a long time were people that were very, very close in mate value. And you can see this on the graph, that at the bottom is mate value increases. On the left, you can see that the duration of the relationship decreases. It's right at the beginning, clustered up, where people are close in mate value and relationships last a really long time. So summing up the results, what do we find when we look at this? We see that the aspirational model is supported by stated preferences. That's what people say they want. But the biological market hypothesis is supported by actual mate choice, what people do. Now, there's a saying in the manosphere that says, watch what women do, not what they say. And so that might be something to keep in mind with these results here. Just some final thoughts here. And remember, I have mentioned a few times already, you already know, this is a non-Western population. So some of you are probably wondering, how relevant is this kind of different Himba pastoralist population going to be to your own life in the West? Well, what we see here is that this study has replicated consistent findings in evolutionary psychology that have been found in Western populations. And you can read the paper and go back and see all of the citations and past studies that this has basically replicated. And what this has done is it has replicated it in a non-Western sample, which is very, very important in psychology. They're trying to encourage that a lot more, especially if you're in a field like evolutionary psychology, maybe something like behavioral genetics. And the reason is because if you believe that a trait is biological, if you believe that evolution has selected for this trait more or less universally across human populations for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, or however long it may be, if you believe that this trait is genetic, then it's a problem if it emerges only culturally. If it's something that only emerges in Western populations, for example, then maybe it's a cultural thing. If it's something that emerges in all populations, even ones with very, very different cultures, then you can start to think, yeah, this is kind of an actual human nature thing, maybe. This is something that perhaps is an evolved trait that is consistent across human beings and that has relationship to genetic fitness or to sexual selection, for that matter, to natural selection. And a quick thought, someone asked in the comments yesterday evening about sex ratios and how they may influence populations. And this biological market hypothesis that turns out actually directly related to that. And we see this in the Himba, for example, that the sliver of elite men have even more purchasing power in the market, so to speak, in part because of that sex ratio, in part because men in general do outnumber women in the population. And that's something to think about as far as sex ratios go. I guess even if you're someone that wants to date and you're struggling, that might even be something that you could apply in the sense of like geomaxing, like, oh, I'm going to go to a country with a better sex ratio. I mean, I don't know. I'm just throwing ideas out there for you. It's not really the point of the video. The point is that we see, once again, replication of these two hypotheses in their respective domains, the biological market hypothesis and assortative mating for actual mate choice, and aspirational mating for mate preferences but not actual mate selection. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope that you learned some things. If you have comments, questions, put them in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want more like this. Guys, if you have ideas for new topics that you would like to see on the channel, let me know as well, and I'll try to get around to looking at those also in the future. So it's been good, and I'll talk to you guys very soon.